Hi, everybody, and welcome to our podcast on why now is the time to get serious about learning in the flow of work. We're currently experiencing, due to the pandemic, a perfect storm. There's a huge opportunity to really take advantage of how you can inject great learning and knowledge into the flow of work. And I'm joined by two very special guests today. We've got David Perrin, who's the Director of Research at Fosway Group. Hi, David.
Hi, Rhys. Hi, Steve.
Hey,
And
David.
we've also got Steve Dineen, who's the President and Founder of Fuse Universal as well.
Hey.
And my name is Rhys, Giles, and I'm the Director of Product here at Fuse Universal. So I'm really keen to dive right in because this is a really passionate subject area for me as well. So, Steve, why don't let's kick off with a question just to frame this, I suppose. So, what's changed or accelerated outside of the pandemic over the last year?
Well, I guess the biggest thing is sorry. I think the biggest thing that we saw, obviously, with the pandemic was the rush to move offline, right? Away from offline, which at first was probably towards Zoom calls and Teams calls, which I think most people are like, can we get less of those right now? The thing that obviously has happened post that is we've got used to not being at work, and the emergence now of the hybrid worker is now, I think, everyone is now seeing the learning industry as being the permanent catalyst of change. So with the hybrid worker there, I think most people are having to now say, well, offline training, so face-to-face training, is no longer and never going to be the primary mechanism anymore. So now actually, what is our learning strategy? Zoom Teams is part of it, but there's a whole new conundrum now to work out an answer for, which is exciting.
Yeah, it really is. And so, David, I'd love to get your take on that. And I suppose understanding how L&D teams are changing their learning offering to be able to respond to this situation.
Yeah, I think it's a really good, interesting question because I think it really mirrors a lot of what Steve talked about in a way. Because what we saw was almost 94% because of the COVID pandemic almost changed their learning strategy. There was a huge swing to adopting digital learning in one form or another because it was the only game in town. And I think what many people did was not necessarily embrace a whole new interpretation of learning. What they did was they virtualized their training and they set up, a bit like Zoom calls, and did virtualize their work. They set up virtual classes, but they didn't really rethink learning to make sure that it was more relevant and more pertinent to how people were working in their organization and that hybrid workforce that Steve was talking about. And I think that's caused some really interesting knock-on effects. What we've seen is people becoming maybe a little bit more digitally fatigued, not only around Zoom, but also around this sort of sense of, oh, here's your 10, 20, 30, 40 minutes or a day of virtual training. And I think what we need to do is think about actually the form and the function to really engage our people. And there are approaches that people have adopted which have been a sort of much more fresh thinking, much more about performance support, much more about just-in-time moments of need, and thinking almost through the eyes of the learner that have gained a lot more traction and sort of almost been a combat, an antivirus for people feeling just worn out by another Zoom call, another watch and listen. And that, what I say, is probably the most significant change. And you see people on a spectrum, right? 2/3 of organisations said they weren't very mature in their adoption of digital learning, and those were the people who found it harder to cope with the pandemic. As we go probably into the next 18 months, I think we're going to see almost a rocket in maturity around people saying, I need to do more, I need to do different, tell me what I can embrace to make this really work.
And I suppose, although the term learning in the flow of work has been around for quite a while, it seems like now is the time for us to really think about what that actually means and how that plays a role in what you've just described there. I suppose it would be good, before we dive into that, just to make sure that the audience and ourselves, we are level set on what it actually means. So, Steve, can I ask you first of all, what do you think that learning in the flow of work actually means?
Yeah, and a good question. So I think maybe the best way to think about that is, what does learning out of flow mean? So if we define that, then the other bit becomes easier. So actually, if you think about Fuse as a native app, as a mobile app, that probably is quite a natural learning and flow type tool, where we see a lot of organizations historically are, retail centers, hospitality, where I don't know how to do that thing, or I've forgotten a piece of knowledge and I search and I find that thing to go. So that's a good example that we've seen over the years. I think the problem with, let's say, even Fuse as a desktop product historically is it is designed as an out of flow tool. So, you're stopping what you're doing and you're going to a different tool to open up, go in there. And often, obviously, more traditional learning platforms, that's going to be a course, right? So that's definitively doing a course, stopping what you're doing is out of flow. Inflow is, and obviously we're launching new products to the marketplace over the next couple of weeks we're really excited about. But inflow is I'm on a task, I need help, I'm stuck on the thing I'm trying to do right now. And I want to be able to click a button, understand what to do in the most frictionless way possible, and then learn that thing or relearn that thing or check instruction if I want to go left or right, and then I'm carrying back on the work that I'm doing. So to us, it's that frictionless piece of activity to learn, apply, learn, apply.
So would you describe it as micro learning, or do you think it's bigger than that?
Well, I think it's hard. I think it's well, I think there's three elements when we think about learning size, right? Macro, micro, nano. So macro is the course, and to me, that's an out of flow activity, right? So there's some relevance to it. I need my health and safety. I need some foundational skills or knowledge to get started in a new role. That's your kind of where your macro stuff fits in. My micro is like Sky, the skateboarder who won the bronze medal. She to learn all the new tricks, she would learn from the best experts in the world who have digitized their knowledge on YouTube, and then she'd be able to watch them, apply them, watch them, apply them. So that video-based type stuff, micro learning, absolutely is the micro. And then nano is, I just want the answer, right? It's the Google-like type, which is, I want the answer to the question right now. Do I cut the red? I'm James Bond. I've got 7 seconds left. Do I cut the red wire or blue wire? I don't need a degree in thermonuclear physics. I don't need the video in telling me how to do it. Just red or blue.
But I think that's a really, really interesting point as well here, because a lot of the time the industry defaults to it being about micro learning. And so we're talking about videos in the flow of work, but actually it's not really about that. It sounds like it's about access to knowledge. And I think that that's exactly what we need to be focused on, is how do we get people closer to that? How do we take the barriers out that exist today because of technology? But technology can be the answer. How can we get people closer to just what they need to be able to complete that task and do their job? David, what about you? Would you add anything to that, or is there anything that you disagree with either?
I don't think I disagree, but I think there are some limits that you have to set some boundaries around what's, I suppose, that sense of what learning in the flow can be, and where you might need to set some limits. And quite often those are not necessarily set by the potential for workflow, work-based learning. It's based around the regulations and compliance that organisations have to adhere to. So if you put me in a helicopter, for example, with somebody who says, just a second, let me look at this video showing you how to fly the helicopter, I'm getting out, right? Because there are certain areas where there's high consequence of people not having a high level of skill when they go live, so to speak. So, and we see that translated in the real world into areas like pharmaceuticals, things where there's the FDA involved in manufacturing goods, so maybe to do with medical purposes. And there's some really interesting stories of people who haven't been trained to a particular level, working on a particular production line, creating a particular product, the organization not having record of their training, and that creating recalls around millions of dollars worth of product and losses of billions of worth of the share value for the organization. So you have to think a little bit about business risk, business continuity, and that whole sense of scenarios where there's high risk, and quite often that's enforced by regulators. Now, what I want to reinforce around that is that's because quite often you need to have had a level of rehearsal in order to get really high levels of execution. And I think that's something just to sort of be aware of. But equally, that's not to say that having the right knowledge presented at the right time isn't going to help those people be high performers, right? There's a reason why every pilot goes through a flight checklist, which is given to them before they fly off, because they might forget something important, right? So trying to think about the almost that moment of need, right? Thinking about how you support knowledge with feedback and reflection and action is something that is also a really valuable part. So whenever you need to really build high level proficiency, think about injecting a little bit of the human can be really valuable.
But maybe just to add to that, maybe just to add to the top of that. So I think, again, this is, I think, where the reskilling and upskilling, comes in, right? So and the driving license of the pilot is a good idea.
Yeah.
So absolutely, I think we all recognise that, you know, your out of flow type stuff, you know, to get your driving license become certified is needed. You don't want to sit next to somebody in the car that hasn't got a driving license, right? Not only it's illegal, it's probably it increases your risk profile on you.
I'm thinking about my son who's just learning now, right? And I'm just thinking, I don't want to get in a car with him at the moment.
And you're probably still not that keen the day after he passes, right? The day after he passed the exam, that doesn't mean because of the driving license, they're still a good driver. That's the highest, that 1 year is the highest it par. So there is that piece that says, yeah, look, we need to get people, you know, on the track of incompetence. But there's a big distance between your son and Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe we want to get everyone, you know, in a role closer to high performing. And therefore, the learning the flow bit undoubtedly is really potent and powerful towards creating higher performance, measurable business results, and getting people towards that high person versus maybe, you know, we view the out of flow stuff, you know, the more formal training as being really good for that kind of foundational, get you started and get you certified.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a strong sort of yin and yang sense to it. And what we focused on in the past is almost exclusively on the yin of we prepare you and then, well, whatever crashes you have, that was your fault. And then on the yang, and actually trying to find a better balance is actually more fruitful for everybody, business and the individual.
Okay, that's great. So I suppose just to bring that back then, one of the ways that what I love what Steve was saying is the macro, micro and nano bit as well. And I think that, you know, what we were just talking about there really is the macro element of that. You know, being able to do that foundational knowledge, be able to practice feedback, you know, all of the great stuff that you were just talking about, David, you know, and I also love the yin and yang element that we just talked about there, because I think that's real key in our industry at the moment. We focus so much on reskilling people and focusing on skills that we also don't focus on what is happening in the moment and how we can get them to perform today. You know, and ultimately, if they're not able to perform today, then there might not be a tomorrow to reskill your users for, right? I think that's really important.
Yeah. So, and I love that. And I've heard Steve talk about this in the past of the speed with which knowledge is changing. So keeping people up to speed. And yet, Steve, I'd probably you should say this because I'm only going to repeat your words. Right? It's just around that sense of how do you keep people up to speed with the things that have changed? Because actually, our development cycles are now agile. It takes 2 weeks before a new product appears. You can't always bring people back into the classroom. You can't bring them back in to pre-train them, but you can provide them with the performance support and the advice in that flow.
And I think I think leading there, right? It's the need for real-time learning now, right? And that's a language that I heard from, you know, one of our clients that their side was, you know, a car manufacturer. Used to be the car doesn't change for every 5 years, so you can train someone, certify a whole global engineering team, a whole global sales team, and that's great when the car only changes, you know, every 5 years. Now, if the car's been updated across the internet every 2 weeks, right, that model is no longer needed. You need a way to get that new knowledge there, to hundreds of thousands of people real time, and those people are not going to remember everything, right? There's just too much to remember because your apps on your phone are changing, your software on your desktop's changing, your car is updating itself towards it, and all the people that sell and service that, right, need a different model towards it, which a lot of that has to be, I can't remember everything, so I need a system that is, to some degree, my extended brain. In the same way that Google is. And really quick analogy, I remember when we first had mobile phones and Google on the mobile phones. I mean, it was a huge breakthrough, right? I mean, we were going past the pub and the taxi driver asking me and saying, oh, you know, that's a famous guy, isn't it? Opened that pub. And I did a search, first time I did this, you know, search on my mobile, and it was like, who opens that pub? He's like, oh, it's Gordon Ramsay. And he goes, wow, you knew it was Gordon Ramsay. Wow, that's amazing. And he goes, I wonder when it's opening. It's like, when's it opening? Oh, it's opening on Thursday. Wow, you know everything. I was like, no, but I know everything that Google does, right? That's, you know, that was the first time that my brain was now the global brain, that everything that Google is indexed understanding. And I think that's what's now coming to the workplace, right? That's exciting.
Yeah, super.
It is really, really exciting. But I suppose the question on everybody's lips then becomes, how do we design for that? You know, so Steve, I'd love to ask you a question around that. You know, how will clients need to get their technology and content strategies ready to embrace this new future?
So I think there's two bits to this, right? So one, obviously, modern platforms like Fuse, we can talk to our own technology because we understand what we have and what's coming. What's been amazing for us is being able now to leverage the great tech vendors' AI technologies. You've got 6 or 8 amazing AI companies in the world, from Apple to Google, IBM and so forth. What's now possible is literally for us to pick and mix and choose the relevant bits of AI against the vision of a product we're going to bring. So it's now possible to have all the technology we use on Amazon every day and Google every day, now available at the fingertips of our learners. So I think first point, that's tremendously exciting. The downside is, though, is those technologies weren't designed to work with SCORM courses. Doesn't mean that there's an end to SCORM courses, right? Because there's probably still a place where health and safety, foundational stuff, that's happened doing. But if we want to really leverage all of this amazing technology that's now our capability to use every day, those technologies are optimized for files, videos, transcripts, text, commentary, and so forth, not traditional learning. So not traditional formal learning performance towards it. So I would say absolutely that it's a really, really exciting format and future we're coming to, but we have to obviously be aware of the fact that, kids go to YouTube, adults go to YouTube for a certain reason, and it is because of a certain type of media, certain content. You go to Google to get a text-based answer because the information is easily accessible to that. So absolutely, there is going to be some rethinking for the more traditional organizations that are still stuck in one format of delivery.
And just to add to that, if I may, I think that there is something about harnessing the power of search. And I know that's been central to what you said, Steve, because Google is all about search, but that's something in the digital learning world that historically people have been abysmal, absolutely awful at doing, because you can't find the comment, you can't find the quote within the course even, right? You might find a high level course, but if it's a bigger thing, you've got an hour to try and flick your way through. As soon as you start to switch to other formats and you get transcripts, you can go to that second, that timeline within that video to say, this is that particular widget or particular gadget, play from there. And I think it's that segmentation, that focus, which is something that's incredibly revolutionary for digital learning. And it's something that's been overlooked by SCORM for a long time.
Well, and I think on top of that, right, I think the interesting thing is all the expertise to utilize that technology is latent in our learners and our users, and it's all there. We don't have to retrain them, but we do have to make them aware that this technology is now available in the corporate environments, because they've had to dumb down their actual consumer skills, and now we can unleash. Actually, thank you to Google, thank you to YouTube for all that training of our learners over the last 10 years, that we can now leverage that in a really powerful way.
So what are you guys saying? And are you saying that that we should take things like SCORM courses and break them down, or is there more to it than that, really?
Personally, I think there's something that it means really transitioning to a different mindset. I think SCORM courses, fine, leave them as SCORM courses, they can do their own thing. When you're thinking about what people need in that moment of need, for want of a better phrase, actually the game changes, and you have to take a much more learner-centered view. You have to be much more efficient and effective in how you communicate and demonstrate. And those are the things I take away. It's much more about being focused and short and pertinent.
Yeah, and I think to that point, right, I think it doesn't mean you haven't got long form experiences, but I do believe, like Fuse School, so Fuse School has been our journey, our social journey for 10 years, but 10 years ago we decided we wanted to make great content, great learning available to all the children of the world, and we have 10 million kids using it, but we built 800 to 1,000 videos mapped against the 4 subjects. They can be accessed in an informal way to search the one thing I need right now. They can be woven together like Lego bricks with activities and other things by different edtech companies to create those formal experiences towards it. But yeah, I think as I talked about that, you want to design the content once for inflow, out of flow, all in one go. Sorry for that. But
Well,
yeah.
Well, one of the things that I'm really passionate about, and I come from the background where I've used Fuse and other products in enterprise environments, and I've been a head of learning technologies. And one of the things that was really apparent to me was that I do have people that have the answers, and we need to be able to give them the knowledge and the skills and the technology to be able to create content, get that tacit knowledge out of their brains, because that knowledge is the most valuable knowledge that you can actually create. And the problem that L&D teams always have is, how do we scale? We have so many different job roles, so many different skills, tasks, processes, whatever it might be, and we can't create content for all of that as well. So although it is about mindset, I suppose really it's about how do you scale that, and then how do you use technology to connect the person that needs that bit of knowledge to the person that has that bit of knowledge and maybe has already put it into the platform. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think to dive in, right, because this has been a passion point, and I think you've hit the big thing, right? How do you make it easy enough that the content can be created by anyone, L&D professionals, top down or ground up, and how can it be found and surfaced in the moment, right? I think those are the two pieces, and I think that's obviously why we've created Fuseflow, which is an in-browser tool, but there's still two parts to that, right? In browser tools or in-app browser tools have been great, but the cost to create the content has been high because you've got to create it in tune with a particular tool. So I think in our vision here, right, what has been really exciting is that, and we're rolling Fuseflow out internally. The first thing we're doing is we're going to each of the people that is responsible for each IT application, the person that owns HubSpot, the person that owns the prospecting software, the person that owns Salesforce, and say, look, just use the Fuse screen recorder and create the half dozen videos or the 10 videos that anyone using the software should know about. The technology of Fuse then indexes that content intelligently, auto tags it, and then Fuseflow, when you click it in whatever application I'm in, it automatically is going to pick up the relevant bit of content for that video. So for me, the dream has always been, how do you industrialize performance support? How do you make it so easy that anyone can do it and let the technology do the hard work? And I think it's only really now, because we can license and leverage all these different AI components and technologies from third parties, that we're being able to industrialize the concept.
And I think what's interesting to me, Rhys, is that actually, if you think about what a learning organization is, it's not an organization that receives training. It's an organization that shares and communicates and is passionate about its knowledge and expertise, and it looks to develop that amongst others. So if you think about teams, you think about groups, think about sort of whole departments, actually the opportunity to help them reflect on what does good really look like, right? What a great way to start a learning journey for an organization. And then say, we're going to capture that and share that with each other. And that will be important for anybody who's a new starter, anybody who wasn't around at the time who moves into our organization, but also it helps us think about what does good need to be. And actually, I think we in the past, there's been so much of a focus on the L&D team being the font of knowledge, so to speak. What we've done is ignore the great expertise that exists in organizations. And that's the point of having a learning organization. It's about sharing that insight and developing that expertise. So I think it's part of a revolution. If you're not adopting the sort of almost, how do we grow ourselves from inside out, then actually you're failing as an organization.
Yeah, and on top of that, I 100% agree, right? And I think many companies have been doing that really well, the last 5-6 years. I think that's now becoming the new challenge, right, for everyone. And I think to your point, right, that then how does L&D keep evolving? And some companies are already there, but some companies are still at the level, right? And it is that part that says, how does L&D now consider its core role, the facilitation of that amazing knowledge expertise that exists in the heads of its best people. The most important, every bit of data shows to us that the organizations that have the learning culture, measured by the frequency that people are choosing to learn, and we can now measure that digitally between that, all of them have absolutely, I would say, are advanced in the digitalization and the sharing of their own organizational tacit knowledge. That's without a doubt, I think, black and white in the data.
But I think it's really interesting, that sort of sense of the deeper realization of the organization to think really clearly about what does good look like, right? Just that question, and then the debate that can create within a team, that expectation of what sort of judging others and giving feedback around that is a huge catalyst for being more high performing, creating more productivity, creating more safety, more wellness within the organization. So I think the knock-on effects are amazing, because it does create this sort of expectation of the sort of learning cycle of you get some input, there's some action, you get some feedback, you make some reflection. That starts from a question of what good looks like. And I think the point we capture it.
No, and I love that, right? And it's something that I think now we're thinking more and more with our customers, right? And what we tend to do now is with a current client is say, let's actually, what does great look like together in 12 months? And then what's our 3-month journey towards that? In 12 months time, there tends to be quite common 3 things. There's one about technology that says, actually, how do I just make It's so easy for people to find whatever they want, whether the content's on LinkedIn, on Fuse, on SharePoint, wherever it is. I want a single point to find what I'm doing, and that experience to be easy to get to, and the experience is great. So there's a technology piece towards it. There's a learning culture bit that we're measuring by engagement. We're saying how often are people choosing to learn in whatever way they want to learn, whether that is some micro learning, some macro learning, some problem solving, some tasks. We all learn in different ways at different moments, but we do know that actually those who learn frequently perform better. So that's a key component to measure. And then third is around kind of business impact. And it may be business impact on a program or a couple of programs that says, look, we're going to prove the value of this investment by either increasing sales, reducing costs. So those three pieces, the 12-month view, and then what's the first 3-month steps to move towards that, tends to be a common framework we're now using.
David, so I'd like to ask you, how do you get started with that? How do you get it off the ground within an organization? Is there a particular audience? Maybe there's a change process or some assessment that can be done that would help them to be able to prioritize where to get started?
Yeah, sure. I take a very sort of broad view of how you get this going, and I think ultimately you have to hunt down the change programs within an organisation, and if you want to sort of get traction, then support those change programs, and they're really easy to spot, right? They're new starters, they're new systems, they're new processes, they're new products, there's new markets that you want to explore as a business, there's new regulations, there's new performance goals that people maybe have never reached before, there's people becoming new leaders. Each of these is a predictable driver for learning because they're change, and that's why we learn, right? We learn to cope with change, and we either trying to accelerate that or multiply it or make it more palatable. That's why we learn. If it was a static world, we wouldn't really be learning a great deal. And I think there's some things that you almost do in terms of prioritizing, and I tend to think about this as being almost like what I'd call a core approach, and I mean that in terms of think about the context for change. Who are they? What devices are available? What help do they need? How soon do they need it? So just setting the context of what change is happening and the value of that. Think in terms of thinking about the outcome. So what difference do you need to make for them, and by how much? What are the goals at a team, personal, customer level? And then you can think a little bit about the route. So what you're going to offer to help people navigate their way through in their context. If they're out on the road, then it has to be a mobile phone or some other device. If they're on a manufacturing floor, where are they going to go if they're not allowed to have a phone on them? Think about that journey and think about what's required in terms of that route. And I love the thinking around the 5 moments of need. So if people aren't familiar with that, go and just type in 5 moments of need in Google, right? Great performance support tool. And they talk about new, build, explore, solve, and change. But it just helps you focus in on the sort of experience that you need to provide people and how much detail they need, right? Is it just a support checklist? Is it a short video? Is it something else? And then the evidence, right? How will you know from your stakeholders that this has made a difference? What business KPIs have changed? What are your measures of success? And as you get into that question of evidence and what the goals are, then actually you're able to start prioritize where you should be starting, because you should be aiming for high value, high difference, measurable success. And that's not only good for your business because it gets them focused, but it's great for you because people see you as a value-adding function, right? So I'd always think about that as being like your core approach: context, outcomes, route, design that, think about evidence. That will drive where things sit in the stack of priorities. And that's what I've always used, and it's sort of served me well. Steve, I'm sure there may be other things you might.
No, I love it too. No, again, I love to, Bob Rush's thinking on the 5 moments. I think that's absolutely in tune with how we think. So, and I think I think Charles Jennings, when he talks to how you create value, I think as well. So for us, that just adding on to or just adding a tiny bit on top of what David was saying, I think to find the programs where you can create value, right? That you can create differentiation. But then what's true for all of those programs is, I think it's then flipping the thinking. So traditional thinking would be, I'm going to start with a course. Now the thinking says, I want to create value. That could be increasing revenue by increasing conversion rates, or maybe it's right first time for engineers. But the first bit is, what am I going to place at point of need, right? So what's the content? And I asked one of our clients, what percentage, one of our advanced clients, what percentage of the contents did they design for informal versus formal on a program like that? And they said it ranges between 60 to 90%. So I take an average of 80 because my maths isn't that great. So, I think that's what we should be aiming for today. I think the technology we have moves that forward. But that's a pretty major philosophical jump of difference, that we're going to think upon creating a learning experience against a business need, where we think first about what's the 80% of content I create informally on inside the app, on the mobile, on a QR code, on a device. That's the thinking. And the 20% piece is maybe the more behavioral type things, where, you know, I've got to learn how to present, for example, and maybe there's a range of interactions, there's content, there's recommendations on how to gain practice, etc., etc. But that I think is core to the flip thinking that is needed to make learning the flow of work and performance and all the benefits that brings, which we know there's a direct connection between learning the flow, continuous engagement, and continuous engagement is high performance.
Yeah. And I think just to add to that, I think there's some really interesting transitional things that are starting to appear within learning, and that's tied to the business data and the opportunity to start to almost personalize the experience based on the understanding of the individual's performance and what other people have said about them, to say, do you know what, this is the key piece of knowledge that you need today to help you through your day. Whether that's at a point in need in their actual day or at the start of the day, that sort of almost intelligent, augmented, intelligent, personalised support for individuals that's really targeted around the individual and what they're doing based on other data. I think it's going to be something that starts to increasingly appear over the next 5 years. It's not really live at the moment, but that sense of moving from performance support to performance optimization is something that I think we're going to get closer and closer to as the boundaries between learning and business data start to fade.
Yeah, and I think it's you hinted towards that, right? I think when we think of personalization, one of the challenges, I think historically, when we think of personalization, we're thinking, how do we personalize a formal course to extract out? And that's still good, right? There's still a place for that. I think absolutely, I think personalization is at all three levels again. It is the macro, which what's the right bits of the right course to help me create foundational skills. What's the right video to teach me to do the trick to win the Olympic gold medal, and what's the predicted piece that I need to do to get this task better, even if it's just down to cut the red wire, not the blue wire, or go left or right, because it's a Google map and it's prescribing the quickest path to that place, which is how I see learning going, right? That it's going to give me the quickest, best path for me as an individual to be a high performer, whether that's a long-term journey I'm on, or whether that's just help me make that right choice now. To what's the right thing that's going to make me perform that job at the best way I can. And back to your analogy earlier on, I think that is where performance support, I think, massively helps in the flow. You know, I was massively influenced by a piece of work I did with BT like 15 years ago when they were going through all the formal learning around order entry, and people were getting it wrong 50% of the time. So it wasn't sticking, or there was too much that are relevant towards it. And that was costing them tens of millions of pounds. And that was the first time we put in a performance support third-party technology in. And it made a huge difference. And people were like, wow, this is like magical. It knows the thing I need next. And like I said, the only downside about that whole technology was it just cost too much to get the content into the right format towards it. And that's why I think this new approach of doing it in a industrialized, automatic way using AI is so exciting.
I think data and analytics are such a hot topic, and they have been over the last few years as well. But I think we're only really scratching the surface at the moment, and we've been doing a lot of thinking internally about analytics and what the future looks like for that as well. I think there's so much more to come for L&D teams. Where we are today is what we would describe as phase one, which is descriptive analytics. So we're able to visualize, make sense, and allow people to take actions from that as well. You mentioned predictive as well, Steve, and I think that's the next step, is how do we spot trends? How do we predict what's going to happen so that, you can correct the course, you can make a change, you can add an event in, or whatever it might be. But I think where it gets really interesting is the third phase then, which is proactive analytics as well. Because what that allows us then to do is look at what the predictions are, but also make it so that you can actually make changes in the platform. So one click, or even automated, but one click to be able to make changes to your learning strategy, to be able to send out a notification to bring users back in who might not have been involved or not engaged in the platform, or it could be about sending out a recommendation to everybody, so that they start to interact with the learning program that they have to do, whether it's compliance or leadership, it doesn't really matter, but it allows us to get proactive actions into the platform, makes it easier to administrate, but it also means you can start to have a much more data-driven approach to your strategy in a way that we've never thought possible before. I think there's just so much to come from that.
Yeah, agreed. And I think probably where most advanced organizations are is manually looking at data insights, being able to take the data, look at that data, come up with a hypothesis, apply the hypothesis, and actually go, wow, that hypothesis is right, and let me now make a different decision. And to your point, the optimum solution is the system is self-modifying continuously to help each individual create their own personalized path, not just in some formal experience, but also in the moment, right? So how do I support you across all those things in an intelligent way to help you be the best version of you can be?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also being able to mine that data and proactively tell L&D teams what people are looking for, what are the gaps in your content strategy at the moment, and being able to plug those, it's a much more efficient use of your resources as well. Yeah, and that data already exists today. You can do that in descriptive, but to be able to automate it so that you can then start to understand who the experts in these areas are, and maybe it just proactively nudges that expert to create a piece of content. If that could be done automatically, that really closes the gap again to getting the right knowledge in the platform and getting it closer to people, so that when they are in the flow, they have that access to what they need.
And it's
interesting. So much you can do in this area.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because we're starting to see some of that sort of play out from employee engagement tools, for example, and the coaching that they're starting to surface to managers. So they're having better conversations with their people around the issues that may be pertinent to that team. Right, and just think it's only a simple nudge of these are some of the questions you might want to talk to David about or Rhys about as part of the team sort of one-to-one sessions. These are some areas that you haven't covered in previous conversations because we've been checking off your agendas that you probably do need to talk about. Maybe there's elements about well-being and wellness, for example. And we're starting to see that sort of filter through from the AI almost being an assistant for the manager to have a better conversation with their people without revealing too many secrets, so to speak. And you can see that's almost sort of a bridge to what you were talking about. It's not too far away because it's happening to some extent now. And the people who've been adopting those sorts of employee engagement platforms with that coaching element wrapped into the data are seeing sort of increases in employee engagement on like up to 10-point scale. So it is having an effect on employee retention, people's sense of career progression and personal growth, so and wellness. So it's quite interesting that that's almost coming through already, but harder to connect it into the business data, and that's not necessarily Andy's fault or your fault to some extent. It's difficult to get your hand on that data sometimes, even though it's very pervasive.
Yeah, and I agree with all that. And I think, again, at the minimum level, I think what we've always seen, the data's told us when we looked at it in clients, is people that regularly get coached perform better, even at simple level, right? The data keeps telling us that over and over again. I think takes another level, and this goes back to that organizational tacit knowledge that when you bottle the greatness of the best people inside a certain role, and people are coached against that, and whether that's manual or automated, right? But even if you're just simply coached against what great looks like on a regular basis, that was really when we saw probably an increase in performance levels that is just unbelievable. So yeah, and it's to your point, how do you bring these worlds of offline and online together, right? Technology and people together, because also to bottle that greatness of the best people, that technology can't do that, right? The understanding of how do I get that message, how you do something, but it's a bit of an art form. A bit like the Fusco stuff, right? It's a bit of an art form. Says, how do the individual get that knowledge out of your head in a way that everybody can understand, right? So Einstein, said that if you can't explain your complicated idea with it to a child, then you probably don't understand it. But I think that's one of the key roles of L&D. How do you help get that knowledge there and then allow people to be able to be coached against that?
Yeah, and I love the stuff that's from sort of like Richard Thaler and nudge theory. And there's some great things that I've sort of picked up along the way around World Health Organization projects around surgical safety, simply by giving somebody a safety checklist, which just goes through all the things that you're going to pre-op and post-op. In the hospitals they tried it out on, they reduced death rates by 47%, right? Just by having a simple checklist. So the importance of bottling greatness is about guiding people to do the right things at the right time, being that sort of good angel on the shoulder to say, this is the right thing to do now. And the simplest things can have huge life and death impact, let alone great work impact. So I think it's a hugely exciting time. And to go back to the question, why do you need to get serious about learning in the flow, there's a new generation of people coming into the workforce. There's a hybrid workforce which is disconnected. There's a fast moving pace of knowledge that we cannot keep up to date with unless we engage and create a learning organisation and chunk it in the right way. It's a hugely important time to embrace it.
And maybe just a personal, I can definitely talk about the benefit of personal happiness and performance support, and the concept of guiding aside. So my kids are 8, 9, and 10, they haven't got the habits or didn't have the habits, and this is using nudge theory, of when they have a pee, getting in the right place in the toilet all the time. So personally, I've got to clean that stuff up. That's not happy. The best bit of nudge theory was getting an LED light. They now sell at Amazon for $3.99. That puts an emoji into the inside of the toilet seat, and then motivate them with if they hit this every time, then they get a few more Pokemon cards, right?
Nice.
And my happiness, insanely. I can't believe it. Every time I go there, that's nudge theory applied for personal happiness.
I love that. The thing is, it worked at Amsterdam airport, right? Schiphol. Did they put a fly on the urinal?
Yeah. Well, we took it up a little. It's awesome. Like an LED emoji now, right? So you do a poo-poo emoji, target emoji, whatever you want. And as soon as and it's light sensitive, right? £4.99, lunch sensitive, walk in there, emoji guns up, bam, they smash every target.
Yeah, perfect.
What a way to end our podcast.
It was going to end up there somehow, one way or another.
Ending, but hey, yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, guys. I mean, I've really enjoyed the last half an hour, and hope everybody that just listens also enjoyed it as much as me. So I suppose, why is now the time to get serious about learning in the flow? Well, I couldn't put it better than what David's just said. We are in the midst of a change. We have hybrid workers. People need access to knowledge. We need to be able to reduce those barriers. And so, really some of the key learnings that I've had over the last half an hour is we have to think differently about content strategy. We have to think about how we create macro learning in a way that still works in the micro and in the nano as well. We have to really think about how do we use data in the right way so that you can actually close those gaps and those barriers.
I think ultimately, as you said, there is 2 or 3 things here, right? There is about people performance. So how do we help the organization perform better because it's people performing better, and it's brand. So brand identity. If people are happy because they're learning more and actually they have great environments, they're being brand advocates for it. I mean, I've seen now, one of our clients is advertising for finance people using its finance academy as a marketing piece towards that. So, so I think there's a range of things now that makes L&D so much more in tune, I think, with the business. And that's where we always wanted to be.
Yeah. And I think what I love about your position, right, is actually it's using technology to make what we do as L&D teams more human, right? Be more accepting of what it is to be an individual who's got kids peeing over on the floor, they've got work to do, they've got other things in their lives, looking after grandparents and coping with a pandemic, right? And being more human-centered, letting people stand on the shoulders of the tech rather than being burdened by it is something that probably isn't a great story at the moment, but I think it's something that you guys do immensely well. And I think it's something that everybody should be inspired by.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, thanks, David. That's great. And thanks both for spending the last half an hour with me, and hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. So thanks very much. See you soon.
Guys, thanks for listening. Take care. Ciao. Bye.